$45,000 for this year to keep the program going. So anybody heard my awkward question yesterday about the funding? The funding seems to come when you prove that it's successful and it's reaching out to the community, it's doing good things. So
But
the other thing that, oh sorry,
but I mean, I think to that point, like that's sometimes why you choose the place that you choose, because you choose the Harlem Children's Zone because Jeffrey Canada and all of this other stuff, people will be like, oh, that's so amazing, and it'll be a little bit easier to get somebody to go to Harlem Children's Zone than some random community center that's like not safe.
and also,
hard to sell, right?
Yeah.
I think that you know, in terms of the sustainability of the program, that the Harlem Children's Zone is not going anywhere, right? Promise Academy is going to be a charter school for the next 25 years at a bare minimum, right? And so you have that understanding that next year they're not going to fall into, despair and go out of business because they don't have enough money.
But it is an interesting question you've raised. So where is our time better spent, right? Funding is a reality.
But I'm not sure that you might have to weigh where is your time better spent. It's probably, I would say it's spent well here because it's successful. Whereas if you did it at a school where you didn't have a trust, an initial basic trust, and it didn't succeed, is that successful?
The sustainability piece for me is really difficult because that means that kids that are in these other neighborhoods will never get access to something.
I was thinking when
It's interesting.
Dexter was talking, the piece of those of us, our school is sort of like that, I think, reaches too. Like there's certain, at Urban, we have folks know us, we have benefactors who like us, we're in the city, it's a very, it's a quiet little gym, right? And yet, last summer, a teacher from a local public school was coming and talking to another St. Ignatius that has a summer camp with us. And they were trying to get help of like, I'm a new principal in this new school, it's being revamped, I don't know anybody in this neighborhood. And we sat with this principal and the assistant principal and we said, okay, what is your vision? What do you want to do? Here are the 3 people you want to call. Do you want me to send an email first? And that kind of like being a beacon for others, I think is what you reminded me of in terms of what we could be doing as a community to serve more students.
And I'll also just give you an anecdote that was shared with me is that this year they realized that they had made a mistake last year in not getting the parents as involved as they should have. So this year they had a mandatory meeting for all the parents before the camp started, and it was at Promise Academy. And Promise Academy is surrounded by all 4 sides by housing projects. So it's not like it's on, like in Central Park and it's this, super affluent area where this charter school is.
Yeah, but if you're a wealthy person who's been to a TED Talk and you heard Jeffrey Canada or you've heard someone else, then you feel pretty comfortable, like, ooh, I want to see it.
Well,
I
understand that, but Danielle said that the biggest learning, the 2nd graders don't care where they're going on the school bus. They get on the sped school bus, they're happy, they go, they're at a school. Right. But when the parents were hesitant, and they get on the bus and they get there and they see the outside and they're like, okay, here we are. But the minute you're in a school, you realize it's a school. Like all schools are schools when you walk in, right? They all have a feel of a school, and she said that was
I feel like a prison.
And I know that this is probably a larger conversation. I say that with the context. I just made the transition into the independent school world, so before that exclusively in public schools, and what I've noticed in my small 1.5-year sample size is that, and this is just my experience, colleagues and folks who I've spoken to are more comfortable with places that are familiar and have notoriety than unfamiliar places and spaces, and that makes all the difference when we think about what partnership really is.
Yeah. And I think it's wonderful to push that, to even just talk about it is an excellent start to pushing that, to be comfortable with the uncomfortable.
It seems like that might be part of the assessment piece as a partnership evolves. So I can understand how people coming together to start a new coding program for girls in the summer, they want to pick 2 organizations that are really well established and or the Harlem Children's Zone that already has people know what it is. But down the road, if they add bring a 3rd school into that partnership, I would think it would be then perhaps the responsibility to look around and say who doesn't have that we could bring into this. And I think it's similar with if you are starting a summer partnership program, from scratch that's not part of a national organization, you might want to start with a charter school, a public school, and an independent school that are, the infrastructure's in place, maybe there's already a relationship there. If you're starting a Horizons program, you might be able to, because you have a network that you're part of and a template that you're part of, you might be able to say, we want to look around and say, where's a school that they don't really have access to these partnerships, and people don't really know about this particular school, and they're not sort of the star charter school in the community, or that there are different times when there's easier opportunity, I think, to say we're really going to look around and say we want to talk to this school that's there's so much struggle that they can't even come up for air to look around and think about partnership.
And we talked about that. Part of this was not knowing the funding.
Yeah.
Is this a long-term project, an endowment, or is this a one-time thing? Could you get it off the ground and it was seemingly successful, then go out to corporations and get funding and extend your reach to other schools?
I think that's a great question and conversation
Really
that I'm
interesting.
assuming they're thinking about. I don't have the answer.
It really answers your question, what might the 2.0 version of
Right.
this collaboration look like? It would begin to include other organizations less well established, right?
The thing that
Greater needs.
I love this program because I think it's replicable.
Yes?
I think you can take this to any place in the country and you can do something similar. It's not it's not rocket science, and it's effective.
So it's 10 to 11, we should switch to WISIT.
Yes, we should.
Let's switch. So who would recap WISIT for us? A brief summary for those of us who didn't read it.
I'll do it.
Right.
So, WISIT, at the Washington International School, they started a summer teacher institute for Washington DC area teachers. They started that in 2014, and they launched that as part of an ongoing kind of decade-long relationship with Project Zero at Harvard. So they had a relationship with Harvard. They were doing a lot of Project Zero practices at their school, and they wanted to share those opportunity to learn from Project Zero educators. They wanted to share that opportunity with teachers throughout the DC area. And so they launched a summer, I think it's 2 weeks long, something like that. And then we think that, and I don't know if this was clear in here, I just went to their session at NAIS, but they have some opportunities throughout the year for those teachers to reconnect. So that's basically the program, and it was launched with funding from EE4 initially.
Anybody want to add anything, or did she get it? Blake, do you want to add anything?
No,
Based on what you?
I think you got it.
Okay, good. So your group's responses, I'll look to all the group members, it's most of you around the table, right, because we had a small group to expense. What were your reactions having read this? What would you say are the strengths and what would you say are the weaknesses, based on what you know?
I would say, I think the clear strength was working with an established program. That, I think we all agree that in our group that was very helpful. It helps to provide some validity to what's happening, but then the weakness is how do you implement that when you go after the summer program? How do you take what you've learned, the information that you've gathered, how do you take that back? So the rest of the, outside the summer, the rest of the year, what do you do to implement it, and how do you measure that? And we had a conversation about, and it's been mentioned, Blake mentioned it here, the independent schools and the private schools have so much more flexibility, at least in Ohio, than what the public schools in the community, charter school, we call community schools in Ohio, have. So you are expected to measure things, you're expected to, even though we all know it's not really that black and white, we're expected to provide.
Demonstrate,
Yeah.
the outcomes. And to account for time in a way that independent schools aren't required to. Sure,
Right,
sure.
right.
Yeah.
And even resources like funding, how do you make those, how do you make changes or implement different practices that may need resources?
And do you have information at all about how that's been overcome or how that's played out in terms of application for, especially for public and charters?
You mean to attend and to
after they leave.
Oh,
this- after they
application,
leave
I'm sorry, I was
yeah.
misunderstanding,
The
the
ability to
application work,
implement.
like, how are they,
Yeah.
well, I think,
How does
because
it-
it's very project-based learning, I
Yes.
feel like, there's a lot of flexibility in that notion in your classroom, and also, I think, there are a lot of elementary school teachers in this program, and there is more flexibility in the classroom in elementary school.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that those two play off. That's not to say that there aren't high school educators there, but I think those two components make it a little bit more accessible for the public school. The charter school teachers in DC specifically they have as much freedom. In fact, the charter schools in DC are really pushing the innovation of educational pedagogy, and so they're really the free ones,
Okay.
because they're not, the independent schools are sort of still hung up in, this is traditionally how we teach third grade. Charter schools are like, hey, we're gonna spin it all upside down, and so the charter schools are the ones who are really pushing the
Interesting.
innovation in the classroom change in DC.
So you can see the cross-fertilization being very rich in that,
Yeah.
that's really interesting, yeah. Other strengths or weaknesses the group identified as you looked at this case? Things you worried about, things you admired?
Well, I think just beyond the implementation, just the idea of resources and time. I don't think that all schools equally have the same resources in terms of being able to implement, and so just not the freedom to come in and just be like, we're gonna rethink how we use our time in the classroom, but really just like being able to manage to that, right? Like in independent schools, private schools, there's the opportunity to have a smaller class size. While half the class goes to music, you can do something very different than, you can rethink how you do that, but it's not always the same for public schools.
One thing that I mean, the many things I admire about the program, one thing that's not mentioned here that I understood from the workshop that they led was that they're wanting to tell their story, and so they have someone at Washington International School who's going out and creating these videos of what teachers are implementing in their classrooms, and so of these participants. So going out and creating that story, and I think that is a really kind of wonderful way to document the impact of your work. So at the Sophia Center, I've been thinking about that a lot. How do I, other than a participant telling me, I went back to my school and did such and such, or I led my faculty meeting this way, or I did this in my classroom, that documentation is really important. And I think, I know that the data matter, but I think those narratives are really powerful too. And then it's also just such a way, like the way they were describing it, it's such a way of honoring those teachers. Like, we're sending someone, you're not trying to figure this out or get a colleague to come in and film your classroom or a student to create a video. We're sending someone there to video and create a narrative about this amazing work that you're doing.
There's such strength in video, I
Yeah.
mean, really, in hearing, and we were talking about that the other day, about just how, even as an organization, we need to employ video, like philanthropy through storytelling. I mean, I just think that, like, when you can connect, and then a teacher will want to go to WISIT because they see the actual impact in the classroom instead of their principal suggesting that this would be a good idea for them to attend. You should all go on it's on our webpage, but you could go onto the WIS webpage. They have an amazing video about WISIT, which you listen and you're like, huh, sounds really familiar, and it's Steve Inskeep from NPR is the narrator,
That's one of the
because
reasons. Familiar,
he's
yeah.
a parent there, but
Familiar voice,
yeah, so it's a beautiful document about their program.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So one of the things I heard you say a moment ago that I want to hang on to is it's an act of affirmation, I think, to actually have somebody from the program come to record the success. I mean, I think that actually is not just collecting evidence, it actually is doing an act of good, I think, that's worth hanging on to.
And I think when you invite people to tell their story, you're also inviting them to articulate their story, and that in and of itself is a kind of growth, right,
Yeah.
for that person. Like, so I took this back, and I'm moving toward project-based inquiry in my classroom, and when you are asked to articulate that for other people,
That's very good.
you get better at it too,
Yes.
right?
Much like if you can understand algebra, but if you could actually teach it to a classmate that your understanding is at a higher level,
Yeah.
this is basically the same principle, right? To be able to articulate it. Yeah, thank you.
I would think the networking for the teachers would be a great long-term thing, because it can be very isolating, and especially in your school of other people are not doing that or buying into some of the things that are very passionate to you, it's nice to have that network that you can go back to and bounce ideas off of.
And all the studies about teacher retention, about having to have a connection and you feel like you have a support system, not just in your school, but just with teachers in general, it helps retain good teachers. I was speaking earlier about a connection between there's a school in Atlanta and a charter school, and they did a professional development program similar to this in nature. And they had the charter school had very high teacher attrition. And then after 5 years of this professional development, their attrition dropped like over 50%.
Where was this?
Drew Charter School in Westminster.
And
so it's just-
So interesting.
And I don't think that was exactly what they were going for. It was just an unintended outcome, which was amazing.
Yes.
So I do think that networking is crucial.
We have just a couple of moments, so
Yeah.
you want to sort of give you a time check and suggest.
It doesn't need to be me.
Somebody
I
might like
really
the
had
last word.
hoped that we would get to talk about our programs in general. So if does anybody have anything they feel like they needed to share, or one last comment about?
Before we have a bell, we will have a bell in about
I know, I
a
feel
minute.
like we have to the bell. I could talk about this stuff forever. I think that the fact that you guys are all here on a Saturday is fantastic.